I've had a couple of encounters with various bizarre things in and around the woods near a native reserve. First one was back when I was 16. Me. Be dating high school sweetheart. Eat dinner with her family, watch a movie, general Thursday night stuff. Would always catch bus home around 10:30. Bus stop is close to girlfriends, she usually waits with me. Had scrap about something dumb. Went to wait for bus alone at about 10:10. Typical teenage romance. Tif. Check schedule for bus. 20-minute-ish wait. Still butthurt about argument but calming down. Notice unusual amount of silence. Normally the occasional car passes. Feel uneasy. Feeling grows as the wait drags on. Eyes set dead up the street toward where the bus comes from. Finally see headlights. Relief. As bus gets closer, light illuminates bizarre figure on side of road. Looks like a greyhound with a weirdly long snout on its hind legs except the knee joints are reversed. It stands up and skitters across the street. One of the most horrible feelings of dread when I saw it. After it scurried into the brush on the opposite side of the road, it was gone and I caught the bus home without incident, albeit shaken. I did see other related things later on. Will continue if anyone is interested. Well, there's a couple actually. A few months later my parents were out of town, so my then girlfriend was taking a bus over to spend the night with me after he parents went to sleep. This one is second hand, but I had her recount the events many times over and her story was the same each time. A little backstory, this area is a fairly wooded suburban area just outside the city. Part of it is a native reserve, and without putting much stock in superstition, I've always felt as though the land was sick in a way. Anywho. B girlfriend. Call her C. Catch last bus of evening at 11:30. Heading toward my place. Passing one stop where just behind the bench is a decently steep hill into deep woods. There's a dude sitting at the bench, arms across the back, head tilted back like he's sleeping. Bus pulls up. Door opens. Driver notices that the man is unresponsive. This is late March, still very cold outside. Driver stops bus to check. Again, this is near native reserve. ODs are very common. See only one on bus. Driver steps out, pokes at dude. Hey buddy. Unresponsive. Bus driver shaking guy to see if she can get response. Sudden bunch of noise from down embankment. Sounds like something running through the brush. Bus driver calls out, who's down there? Silence. Hello. Deep reverberating bark comes from down the hill. C described it as the sound of a biplane mixed with deep exhale, but fast and quick. Said she could feel it through her whole body. C screams, hides under bus seat. Bus driver screams. Hauls ass back into bus, pulls it into gear and floors it. C poked head back up and checks behind as they pull away. Bench dude is gone. Meet her at bus stop near my place. Absolutely hysterical and crying. Glued to my hip, shivering whole way home. I've got a few other ones too. It will take a while to type out though. My fiance's family lives in the area too, ironically. When I was younger, though not as young, I used to walk her dog through the woods in the area. Keep in mind also that there was around a good 4-year gap between me being in the area regularly, and it did make me let my guard down a bit. Be me. Early 20s. Girlfriend and mom are making dinner. Dog is going bananas cause he wants to go for a walk. Volunteer because gentleman and I was and still am very fond of said girl and trying to make best impression possible on mother. Now a few things about this dog. He is a massive dog, likely a Malamute crossed with something else big that gave him floppy ears. He was a rescue. And he almost never barks. When he wants out he does what we call the snapping turtle, where he mouths a bark but doesn't make sound. He is also extremely friendly. Leash up dog and head out. Is daytime so woods can't be spooky. Mistake.jpg. Take dog a ways down trail and let him off leash. Dog frolics a bit, takes massive dump off trail, general dog stuff. Keep wandering regular trail. A long way notice thin, slightly overgrown trail I never noticed. Think fuck it, why not, let's explore some. Cruise down trail, encourage Doge to chase squirrels and birds before calling him back. Having a great time. Trail comes to a switchback that goes up a small hill. Call dog over and run with him to the top. Reach top and it's almost a completely different forest. Below, it's pretty standard with Douglas fir and tons of undergrowth. Extraordinarily easy to lose trail if you head into shrubbery at all. Up here is just trees and long grass. Up to my mid-thigh. Can see a long way in any direction except behind me, which is the aforementioned scrub. It's also quiet and feels heavy, like walking in a pressurized environment. Dog goes from happy and bouncy to immediate submission mode. Ears down, tail low. Walks directly up next to me. So close side is touching my leg. For whatever reason I took this behavior as meaning he may bolt. Leash him back up and keep walking, looking all around us. Feel watched. It's almost entirely soundless, only sound is mine and dog's footsteps. Continue following path, eventually come to a fork. Right turns back in the direction the lower forest and most likely loops back around to where I came from. Left goes downward in the opposite direction. Decide to go right but wanna look down toward left direction, not sure why to this day. Dog switches sides and attempts to herd me right. Begins to whimper and pull right on his leash, very unusual behavior for him. Tugs, whimpers and even barks, getting more and more reckless. Immediately stops and looks left over his shoulder, totally fixated. Glance back left and immediately regret it. Something moving on left trail about 40 yards down. All of my regret. See grotesque figure. Not extraordinarily tall, 5 feet with extremely bulbous and pronounced joints. Knee joints were backwards like the funky greyhound thing I saw as a kid. Torso looked like a starved horse and was a gray-brown in color. Arms were lanky and ended in 3 long fingers. Had a bulbous head with no neck. Looked like some kind of gray with a massive cranial area. But it had eyes like 2 white circles that almost glowed like looking at the sun. There was no jawline or mouth. It's peering out from around a tree, looking around. Looks up and locks eyes on me and freezes perfectly still. Every part of my body had goosebumps. Tears literally welled up into my eyes and I whimpered. It straightens ever so slightly in its posture. Jolted back to sense by dog hauling ass down trail. Scream and run with him, partially getting towed by leash wrapped around arm. Thank Christ for Malamutes. Full sprint all the way back to switchback. Chest burning. Look over shoulder briefly. Fucking thing from before is about 60 feet back, perfectly still, and watching, eyes locked with mine. Let out a short panic bark of sorts and run straight down incline. Literally run straight down, switch back through shrubs, dog still with me though I am at ack with him now. Get back onto main trail in regular part of forest. Finally see opening to cul-de-sac where GF house is. Slow down to a speed walk. Glancing over shoulder like crazy. Stuffy feeling from upper meadow is gone. Feels like regular forest again. Slowly come back into feeling body as adrenaline wears off. Legs cut to shit from running at Mach 5 through shrubbery downhill. Dog is equally wrecked, but he has long fur so he looks like he's wearing a ghillie suit from all the twigs and leaves now stuck in his fur. Arrive back at GF's place, begin to brush dog to clean him up. Gotta maintain dem brownie points. Make up story about seeing a cougar to GF. Tell her not to walk dog in those woods. Brush out dog's fur, he slept in the bed with us that night. I have only a few more stories if anyone is still interested. I'm going to bed for the night though as it's 2 a.m. here.
When I was 19, I worked for a company that allocated labor to rural areas of Australia. Basically what you did was tell them when you were available, and they'd send you to a remote farm for a few weeks where you'd do whatever they needed done. It was hard work and long hours, but good pay and good fun if you got in with a nice group of workers. When this occurred, I was working on a large property. I was told it covered roughly the same landmass as the state of Maryland, USA, about 9 hours from Sydney City, and the property itself was about 40 minutes from the nearest town. In short, it was the middle of nowhere. I was working at the farm clearing bushland with 3 other guys my age from the city. Our boss was a guy called Jeremy, who owned the farm and supervised us while helping out with the work. He was pretty laid back, and was generally really good to us. This summer in particular was very hot, and the work was hard, so one day when the temperature hit about 38 degrees Celsius, about 100 Fahrenheit, Jeremy decided to give us the afternoon off. He said he knew of a waterhole on the farm about a 25-minute drive north. I was keen for a swim, but the other guys just wanted to relax for the arvo, so him and I hopped in one of the work trucks and started heading across the property. It was mostly wide, empty expanses with a few clumps of scattered bushland. Jeremy wasn't much of a talker, so we drove more or less in silence. After about 20 minutes, however, he suddenly perked up and jabbed me in the ribs. "Do you see that over there, beneath the 2 dead trees?" I should mention here that if you're not familiar with inland areas, particularly those in Australia, they are brown or red, and mostly flat and bland, meaning any bright colors stick out like a sore thumb. So you can imagine our surprise when we could see a large blue angular structure far off in the distance. We steered in its direction, and as we got closer we realized it was a huge blue shipping container just sitting in the middle of nowhere. Jeremy was perplexed. I asked him if he knew what it was, but he obviously didn't. He said he hadn't seen it when he drove through the same area about 5 weeks before, and he wanted to go and see what it was. Initially we pulled to a stop about 100 meters away from it. At this stage one had a really bad feeling. The whole thing wasn't right. It's hard to explain, but if you can imagine seeing such a foreign object in the middle of a huge barren expanse, it had to be something weird. Jeremy, however, wanted to investigate, which I understood, given it was his property, but in truth I was really anxious. As we got closer, things got even more bizarre. There was a big diesel generator behind it thumping away, and a CCTV camera on each side, all motion activated, so they buzzed from side to side, following us as we moved around. I tried to reason with Jeremy, something along the lines of, "With all this security, someone obviously doesn't want us here, let's just go." He brushed me off, however, reminding me it was his farm and whoever had put this here was trespassing, so he wanted to go inside. Despite all the surveillance, there was only a small padlock on the huge door. We had some bolt cutters in his toolbox, and after a bit of a struggle, we broke the lock and went inside. The first thing I noticed was the rush of cold air as we got in. The place was air-conditioned, which I must admit was quite pleasant on such a hot day. We searched around for a light switch, but I could already see this was some sort of IT setup. There were flashing LEDs all around the place and the sort of hum you hear when a hard drive is working hard. When we finally switched on the lights, we could see a sophisticated, albeit somewhat cluttered, office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage boxes scatter around the far wall, and several desks with computer monitors arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this stage one felt like I was in one of those nonsensical dreams. This made absolutely no sense. We wandered to the middle and sat down at the desks to see if the computers could give us any idea of what the hell was going on here. My heart was racing and I just wanted to bolt. We had been seen by the CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring they already knew we were here. Jeremy on the other was adamant we had to get to the bottom of this, so I put on a brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook and Microsoft Word. The best I can describe it from my lay position is that it was endless lists of computer talk. It was like the old Napster or LimeWire download screens looked like, just constantly picking up and receiving data, then recording it on several windows. I gave up on the computers and walked cautiously over the far end of the container to the big pile of storage boxes. By then I was pretty sure no one else was there as there was nowhere to hide really, but I was still incredibly on edge. I decided, against my better judgment, to see what was inside all these boxes. My brief sift through this box still makes me feel sick to the stomach. It didn't take long for me to realize that this box was full of posters, DVDs and photos, all of hardcore child pornography. One thing that still gets to me is that it was all neatly ordered into folders and smaller boxes. These people were organized. I immediately recoiled, jumped up and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together. I said something to the effect of, "Mate, get out, child sex, go, get the fuck up." I dragged him out, composed myself and managed to explain what I saw. We jumped back into the truck and sped back to the house. The farm had no mobile phone reception, and we hadn't bought the satellite phone, so we had to get back to the landline to call the police. Once we called them, they still had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in a town about a half hour from the town closest to the farm, as I mentioned, very remote. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 4-wheel drives, and we jumped in and led them back. This is where it gets worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open and there was fire inside. We had only 2 small extinguishers in the cars, and these did very little. The fire department took an hour to get there, by which stage most of the damage was already done. An arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of the computer equipment described, and only traces of paper and cardboard. This means that whoever ran it knew we were there and had time to come and remove most of it and get away. There were various ways to get off the property and the landmass was huge, so there was no real way to tail them. Since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first instance, probably due to our poor explanation on the phone, aerial surveillance was also impossible by the time we had pieced it all together. I took a keen interest in following it up, but with no real evidence of who might be responsible, the investigation went cold. I've kept in contact with Jeremy, and the shipping container is still sitting there on the farm, as it's too expensive to move. I'll never forget what I saw in those boxes.
Yes I do. Driving solo to Sholo to visit Grandpa earlier this August. 20+ hour drive and too cheap for motels, but thanks to ADHD had me a bottle of scraps to tide me over. It was monsoon season and I was on the midnight leg of my drive, and the moon is waxing. If you've never driven through the Arizona desert at night, or lived in Arizona during monsoon season, then nothing can prepare you for how indescribably beautiful it is. Unfortunately, I was driving through New Mexico in that big stretch of nothing between Santa Rosa and Albuquerque. Still, I was the only car on 140 that night, and the weak moonlight barely illuminated the flat desert around me. Every so often, lightning would light things up and make shit actually visible. I remember seeing a tall saguaro off to my right, just blacker lines in the night. Fucker was easily as tall as the one in Pic related. I watched it pass by because highway hypnosis is no joke. The moment it passed by my passenger window, lightning struck off in the distance, and I saw the cactus clearly for the first time. It's like the instant this thing was in view through my passenger window was broken into 3 frames. First frame, something tall and thin standing about 20 feet off the road, standing with arms held up to the side of its neck like it's doing the fucking YMCS. Second frame, a head flipping around from a long, stocky neck and peering down at my car. Third frame, the arms of the cactus bending down. Needless to say, I gunned it at 90 miles per hour until I hit to Albuquerque, never looking back. When I got to Sholo, I actually told my grandpa about what happened, because I'm not a dumbass creepypasta protagonist. All he said was that, if you got scared that easily, you probably shouldn't go round the superstitions at night. Then he fucking chuckled and kept drinking his beer. So my question, /x/ is what's in the Superstition Mountains? I live about 30 minutes for them and have never heard of anything being in the superstitions aside from people mysteriously disappearing looking for the lost treasure that's apparently hidden within them. Mysteriously is a pretty silly term considering it's the fucking desert and very easy to get lost up there with all the steep hills and shit.
I went on a vacation with a girlfriend from Oregon. This was in southern Oregon off of the Rogue River in an old mining town. We pitched a tent at her parents' farm and spent the days in the river and the nights drinking beers under the stars. 3 nights in, we went hiking to watch a meteor shower on the top of a mountain behind her parents' property. We were probably only a mile from her parents' small farm. We packed binoculars, blankets, some wine, and flashlights. Right after sunset, she led me up along a horse trail to a gravel road. From there we hit a series of switchbacks which slowly led us to the top of the mountain, passing a few abandoned mines along the way. The area was heavily wooded, but there was a clearing at the peak where loggers had made their base during an long ago cutting operation. You could see down into the valley we climbed out of and over the peak and down into the other valley to the north below. She grew up here and wasn't afraid of a night hike, but it honestly put chills up my spine. We laid out the blankets and popped the wine. The shower wasn't going to arrive until 1 a.m., we had plenty of time to kill. We played grab ass and smoked some pot and watched the stars come out. While we waited, we heard crunching noises on the slope under us. A tall buck sauntered out into that flat clearing that we were in and headed down into the northern valley. It scared the hell out of us, but we had a good laugh. We relaxed again and stared at the stars. We could see the Little Dipper, Vega, Saturn, Sagittarius, and tons of other stars. Around midnight we were making out and she suddenly became rigid. "What is it?" I asked her. "Someone is coming," she said, motioning to my left with her eyes. I rolled over and looked up the trail leading up to us from the northern valley. In the dark I could barely make out the silhouette of a rider on horseback. As he came closer I could also see he was pulling a mule behind him. The rider had on a large black hat with a wide brim above a huge dark mustache. The mule trailing behind him was loaded up with gunny sacks that were full of something. When he noticed us, he didn't call out, but instead he quickened his trot towards us. We had been laying flat on our sides and now I sat upright and called out "Hey man" to him so he wouldn't ride over us. He just kept coming towards us until he almost on our blanket. He jerked the reins hard to his left and shifted his weight in the saddle to get a better look at us. I looked up at his face, but it was too dark to see his face when he was backlit by the sky and the hat covering his eyes in shadow. His wore canvas poncho and black shapeless boots. I had never saw a mule before this and was surprised at how large it was. I said hello again, but he just turned back to the trail and headed down the valley that we came from in silence. As he cantered away, his giant mule also gave us the once-over. My girl and me turned to stare at each other in the dark. "Do you know that guy? Who was that?" She had never seen him before or those horses. She wondered out loud where he could possibly be going. The trail only went back down to her parents' house, and further down about a half-mile was the neighbors. Spooked now, we turned on both of our flashlights. I felt defenseless after we were rolled up on by this silent stranger. We were too scared to follow him, but didn't want to stay where we were either. I asked her what was in the valley to the north. She said there was nothing for about 5 miles, where there was a tiny village consisting mainly of a small gas station. But that it was miles away through a pitch-black forest. This somehow unnerved us both more. We both hastily folded up our blankets and bottles. With no way else to go, we headed down the same trail the rider headed down shortly before. Slowly we made our way downhill down the same switchbacks. On one particular long and straight section, the beams of our flashlight barely caught the man and his animal slowly passing around the next bend. "Hey!" I screamed out angrily. He just kept going like he didn't hear us. My girl asked what is he had a gun or axe? Let's just hang back. I was fine with that because this guy's was acting weird as hell. We waited for a few minutes in the dark to allow him to get further ahead of us. As we approached the second mine we had passed earlier, we heard a mournful howl come from the mine itself. It sounded like a bird or owl, but it startled us so badly, we both started running downhill. We ran for 2 or 3 more switchbacks, before coming to the fork that led back to her parents' farm. I looked towards the section of the path downhill from us and saw nothing. As she started down the trail, I shined the light back uphill behind us. In the glare of the beam about 40 yards uphill was the rider. He stood motionless looking directly at me. There was no reflection from his eyes or end of the riding tack. We must have ran past him in the darkness of the trail, I told myself. His ashen mouth started moving, but nothing came out. Suddenly, like a stutterer, he starts saying I. My adrenaline exploded into my bloodstream. I anxiously turned back downhill and ran down the trail towards my girlfriend, who was already 100 feet down the path. What was he trying to say? Was he even human? Terrified, we both tripped and fell a few times in the dark in our rush back to the house. When we hit the field, we ran all the way to the porch. Her father sat quietly in the dark on the porch. He jokingly asked us if we seen the miner. I said we saw a guy on a horse with a mule in tow. He said that was the ghost of a miner who had been murdered by his own business partner. He said the miner walks the forest looking for his killer. Now I was so scared that I initially believed the whole thing. The next morning I dismissed what we had saw and figured her father had talked a neighbor into scaring us. He denied it and then accused us of pulling his leg. That next day we stood on the porch and constantly scanned the large field leading to the trail. We didn't leave the porch and played board games inside when the sun set. The next morning after breakfast we packed up and drove home. We mulled over the dark rider for hundreds of miles on the freeway, taking comfort in the fact that every mile we drove was a mile further away from the man we saw in the dark.
I got one, might be long as shit, so I'll green text it. B19. Just got engaged. Fiancé likes to stay inside and video games. Convince her to come with me on a camping trip with some mates from work. Load up on liquor, smokes, guns and ammo. Bring a couple 22s for plinking and a few hundred rounds. Some dangerous animals in the R we're going to, so bring her AR as well. Meet up with Stoner Bro and his sister. Hop into their SUV and pick up the other guy. Other bro is sort of strange and quiet, but a pretty alright dude, if not creepy sometimes. On our way to Stoner Bro's secret spot. Almost there and car runs out of gas. What the fuck, I thought you filled it up before you picked us up. Guess I forgot, dude. Well, it isn't too far, we can hike it. Sigh and agree. It was about 11 when we left, got there around 1 p.m, hike took about 2 hours, mostly for piss breaks though. Finally arrive at the clearing, stoner bro overjoyed, immediately starts smoking. Start setting up a fire while fiancé sets up the tents and shit. Creepy bro is listening to his iPod. Stoner bro's sister awkwardly tries talking to my fiancé and helps her. Crack open some beers, it's around 5 p.m. after we get all settled in. Roast some hot dogs, mallows, make s'mores, good old-fashioned camping. Creepy bro keeps jerking his head up from his notebook and keeps scribbling shit. Dick around, get a bit fucked up till about 9 or 10 p.m. Finally decide to call it a night, we'll plink the beer bottles and cans in the morning. We all crawl into our tents except for Creepy bro who stays up doodling his Slenderman or whatever. Going to break these up because the limit. Just a side note, I'm not a writer or anything, so if I wander off into needless details, excuse that. Sleeping when hear a loud yelp. Wake up, tactically shit the sleeping bag and peek head out of the tent. Creepy bro looks like he pissed himself, ask what's up. He looks at me and says, "Oh, it must have just been a fox or something, sorry for waking you anonymous." "No problem brother JPG. A bit irritated but figure he's autistic or something so just sigh and go back to sleep. Wake up about 30 minutes later to the same yelp. Pissed off I storm out of my tent and go to talk to Creepy bro. Creepy bro is in his tent sleeping. What? Figure I'm just hearing shit in my half-sleeping state, but look around just in case. Meh, nothing. As I'm just crawling back into my tent hear loud breathing and twigs crack. Completely freeze. No idea why I froze but for some reason I got this instant feeling of utter fear and dread coursing through my entire body. Stand there half in my tent, my ass hanging out the back of it. Fiancé wakes up asks me what I'm doing. Notices I'm visibly freaked out. Slowly reach for her AR and say SHH. Load it and rack it, turn around and look around outside. Nothing, just a drunk fucktard half naked with an AR. Hear a sudden crackle in the woods, really loud and sudden. Jerk toward the sound and accidentally ND into the woods. Everyone jerks awake and yells what the fuck. Apologize, tell them I just saw a deer. Go back to sleep, nothing else except stoner bro pissing on a tree outside and falling over. Morning comes, everyone still pissed at me about last night. Do some plinking, make some chili, everyone forgets about it after a bit and we have fun again. I still feel that dread from last night so I keep a bit quiet. We hiked around for a bit, took in the breathtaking scenery and just enjoyed life for the whole day, nothing unusual really. Night falls once more. It's a chilly night so we build a giant roaring fire. Shit's cash, we roll some logs over to sit on and just enjoy some mallows. Creepy bro stays out of the circle like usual, and doodles on his notepad. Doodling intensifies. Talking with stoner bro and his sis. Talking about work, how we hate our bosses, normal stuff kids do. Fiancé is tired from all the hiking and shit which is unusual for her because she's fairly fit. She just lays her head on my shoulder while I talk to stoner bro when suddenly. Creak. Everyone even Creepy bro jump straight the fuck up. Look around and we all ask what the fuck was THA. Creak. Is that a fucking tree falling? Instantly that fear comes back but much worse, the dread as well. We all begin to feel sick, think someone spiked our liquor with something. Everyone runs to grab the guns. We get our shit and group up close and watch our flanks. Stoner bro, fiancé, and stoner bro's sister are freaking the shit out. Suddenly, blood-curdling scream from the woods. Then another. And another. Jesus what the fuck. Everyone starts grabbing whatever's most important to them and we jet. Running down the steep hill we walked up the other day stoner bro's sis trips and hurts her leg or foot or whatever. Suddenly Creepy bro runs up to her and I swear to God carries her over his shit and still runs faster than a black man runs from dead. Get to truck, hop in. Shit, no gas. Creak and screams in the distance and some close by. Creepy bro grabs stoner sis and runs way ahead of us like an idiot. Drops his notebook, pick it up on the way. We run for God knows how long or far until the noises stopped following us. Completely out of breath we rest for a bit. Look up after some minutes and see a naked dude standing in the distance. I'll conclude it in next post. Typing this all out by hand, bear with me. Dude is staring at us. Get up and stare at him back, call out. Hey dude, you lost? Silence. Fiancé says we need to leave. Why? Says, dude look at his fucking head. What? Realize his head is a weird triangle shape. Suddenly that yelp. Maximum fear.webm. Then yelp, yelp yelp all around us. Tactically shit out an entire Abrams and damn near cause World War III in the woods. We start running again. Stoner Bro's sister is so scared she's limp running faster than my fiancé who ran track for 6 fucking years. We run for about 20 more minutes when I look back, then just before I turn my head I trip. Slam my head on concrete, it's the fucking highway. We calm down but keep a quick pace down the way we came when we got to a gas station. Finally sat down outside it since it was closed. No one says a word. We all dose off and hitch a ride with an old couple headed our way later that morning. On the way, remember Creepybro's notepad. Go to hand it to him but he's passed out. Decide may as well see what this kid draws. Flip through, dragons, furries and shit, pretty damn good artist though, dates on all his shit. Flip to the end and see the date from when we arrived. Look at it, he drew trees falling, the next day, like a legion of these dudes with triangle heads. Mind blocked out seeing the naked dude but seeing this picture, even the stance was exact, and so was the distance. I get that fear and dread once again, and swear to God, heard that yelp again even though we were miles away at this time. I still have nightmares about this shit and this was years ago. I'll be here for an hour or so if anyone has questions.
My van was great. My old bandmates and I drove it all over the Southwest in the early 2000s. We put a lot of miles on that old van. Last Tuesday, it finally gave up the ghost. Transmission completely shit the bed, and there was nothing to do but either drop a few grand on this rickety old bucket, or send it off in style. I removed the stereo system to put into my pickup. Then I got together with the old guys from the band and a bunch of other friends, one of whom owned a tow truck, and we towed that old van out into the middle of the desert. Then we built a massive funeral pyre and hauled the van up into the middle of it. Then, after toasting to the old tub's years of faithful service, we lit that shit and ran. We set up the party area a good ways away. It took longer than we expected, but finally the massive boom of the gas tank exploding was met with drunken cheers. But then there was something we didn't expect. The flames took the shape of a humanoid being. Slowly, tentatively at first, the moving flame creature took a step, then another. With each step it seemed more steady, more confident, until it began striding purposefully toward us. We were so dumbfounded, we didn't even move until it had seized its fiery hands around our old drummer's neck. It was then that we saw it had a face consisting of 2 angry glowing red eyes, and a mouth with 2 sharp fangs. Before we knew what was happening, it sank them into his neck and starting draining his body of blood. From the shadows behind a nearby boulder, we suddenly heard a hoarse scream. We all turned to look and saw a disheveled old man come rushing toward us. What fresh hell is this? I wondered. The old man reached into his overcoat and pulled out what appeared to be a wooden stake. He then leapt at the fire beast and plunged the stake into its chest. Surprisingly, the beast cried out, dropped our former drummer, then immediately disappeared into a puff of smoke. He stared angrily at us and shouted, "Well, that ought to teach you fools never to create another Vanpyre."
Hello/X/. This is a story about my aunt. Growing up, I knew very little about my mother's side of the family. They had basically disowned her after she decided to do the unthinkable and go to medical school at a time, particularly in the deep, rural South, women would never be doctors. My relatives were scowling faces that wandered in and out of holiday gatherings, pausing just long enough to pass judgment and leave my dad outraged for about a week. The only one out of the mob that really made an impression was my mom's older sister. This woman sent me acne medication for my birthday one year when I had started that awkward breakout phase. She once lectured me for 20 minutes about how, since I had inherited mom's desire to work when I got older, no man would ever love me. I was 10. I only give you this background so that you'll understand how unsettling it was when my grandmother called my mom one evening and asked her to fly down there to see them. My aunt had experienced what they called a severe psychotic break or something along those lines, and none of the relatives knew what to do. Or had the money to do it. My mother dutifully packed her things and I was somehow swept along for the ride. I was only 14 at the time and still hadn't perfected the art of saying no to my parents. The best thing about that age was that because I was awkward and mousy, people tended to ignore my existence. I got to sit in while the grandparents told my mom everything they knew about this breakdown, and mom stressed over and over that she wasn't a psychiatrist. My aunt's latest ex was meth dealer. Who knew what kind of stuff they had been brewing and sampling? Also, there were probably diet pills. She'd become obsessed with a Ouija board. Depression runs in the family. She was always a little off. Etc. 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 All they knew was that after her work had called them asking for her, they'd found her completely naked in her living room, curled up and talking to herself. She had covered pages and pages of notebooks with nonsensical symbols and equations about God and demons. I think I should pause here for a moment. I understand if you think I'm setting this up as some wild demonic possession story. I'm not. I am a skeptic, and I have no idea if the events following this had anything to do with the paranormal. Methamphetamine psychosis is scary enough on its own, and there were so many holes in her brain at this point, who knows what she was really thinking. However, the story is a little gruesome either way, and I'm finally at a place where I feel like I can tell it. Anyway. So with few other options in BFE Georgia, my grandparents had locked my aunt up in the guest room and called my mother. Once again insisting that she was not a psychiatrist, my mom told my grandparents that they had to get my aunt sent to some kind of hospital where she could get the proper care, and in the meantime they needed the supplies to hold them over while they decided what to do. Mom called in some prescriptions and got ready to head into town. Unfortunately, the downside to being 14 is you're old enough to be expendable, and somehow in the shuffle I was assigned the task of waiting at the house with my aunt and making sure nothing happened while they were gone. Mom promised they wouldn't be long and assured me waiting at home was better than being trapping on the hour drive into town with my grandmother. Many Southerners will tell you that not all of the South is barren fields and terrifying locals. Some parts have some amazing natural beauty. This is completely true, and anyone close-minded enough to bypass an entire section of the country based on stereotyping is really missing out. Unfortunately, this house was not located in any of those areas. This was miles of red clay, tobacco crops, pine trees, power lines, the family house, me, and my batshit aunt in the back room. There was no cable, no internet, and next to no cell reception. I was stuck listening to my CD player and playing Tetris on the couch, counting the agonizing minutes until my mom came back. Because time moved so slowly out there, I can't really tell you when I was clubbed from behind. The thud was dull, but the pain exploded in the back of my skull. I used to think that cartoon characters seeing stars was just cutesy animation, but I swear my vision erupted into different colors as I tried to regain my senses. I didn't drop like people in the movies do though. I was vaguely aware of someone grabbing my arms and dragging me from the sofa to a chair. I even stumbled a little in response. Unfortunately, the static wouldn't clear enough for me to stop them as my hands were tied to the arms with something thin enough to cut. It was only after my midsection had been bound and my throat was well on its way that I snapped to. I rocked my head back and forth to get away, but it was no good. What I now realized was brown twine was roped around my neck to keep me upright. I can't look at the stuff anymore without itching. Her work momentarily finished, my aunt moved around the chair to face me. She'd never been an attractive woman, but at that point she looked like topless holy hell. The meth had left her with open sores, some of which she had scratched into ragged, weeping holes. Her arms were covered in blackening holes all oozing rot. When she grinned I got a good look at the infamous meth mouth. I can't even describe the smell. That wasn't just from her wounds either. She had caked shit all over her legs, up to the scratches around her sagging breasts. But the worst part was the strange glint in her eyes. There was someone home up there, but it was more feral than person. When my eyes locked on hers, she grabbed a bit of her short blonde hair and tugged hard enough for her eyebrows to raise. You see this? They say I can take your hair for myself. Panic was finally starting to register as I realized just what the hell was happening to me. Too tiny to be much of a fighter, I mostly just started hyperventilating and staring. I remember realizing that I couldn't remember the word for what Indians used to do to their war victims, but it was definitely about to happen to me. I started squeaking a little and trying to yell out as she disappeared into the kitchen for a moment and reappeared with a knife. Thankfully she just grabbed a clump of my long brown hair and started trying to saw it off inches off my scalp. It still hurt enough for me to finally cry out over it. Likely unsatisfied with her results thanks to a dull knife and thick hair, her attention turned back to my face. That's nothing, she hissed. From behind my back she produced a hammer, probably what she had hit me with in the first place. The next swing brought it down on my life index finger. The fingernail cracked from the strength of the blow. My sobbing only made my aunt laugh harder, and she tossed aside her tangles of hacked off hair in favor of digging out the nail pieces and ripping them away one by one. The pain was so bad I nearly threw up. This process repeated for the middle finger and my thumb, though for some reason the thumb took 3 swings to crack thanks to the odd angle it was at. I vaguely noticed through the pain that as she yanked the left bit of nail from the bed her head is tilted slightly and her mouth was hanging open. She was listening to something. She finally stopped picking at my fingernails and leaned over to take my index into her mouth to suck on. My mind started desperately pulling itself together. I had to get out of there. There was no way out. Not matter how much I screamed, no one was around for miles. I had to survive long enough for my mother to get home. What if this lunatic killed my mother? Somehow I choked out some version of "Why are you doing this?" My aunt looked up from where she was sucking and narrowed her eyes, as if indignant that I had interrupted her. She sat up and proceeded to spit some of the blood she'd been drinking into my face. They chose you. And I hate you. At this point she started ranting. I wish I could reproduce exactly what she said, but the details are blurred, half because this memory was so diligently repressed for so long and half because no of it made any sense at all. It was something about a dark lord and people in the walls, but there was also talk of the government and radio waves. What I do recall is that she paused and leaned in so close that our noses were nearly touching. The smell of her breath was so horrible I could taste it in my mouth. I know, she whispered. You can smell my brain rotting. But let me tell you. He's not joke. He wants your skin. They all want your cunt. Her tongue stretched out of her mouth and wormed itself over the lower half of my face. I started sobbing and gagging at this point. She tried to get her tongue into my mouth, but I spat at her, which enraged her. She screamed at me to be quiet and swung the hammer at my mouth. One of my front teeth hit the floor and the others weren't in much better shape. My memory now goes fuzzy, mostly a blur of pain and fear. I was completely sure I was going to die an agonizing death, and the blood loss now occurring didn't do anything for my thinking. I was aware of her shuffling away. I know she returned. My next clear memory is of her using a marker on the old wood floor to reproduce what I recognized as a Ouija board. Only half of the letters were actually letters. The rest were twisted symbols that must have made sense in her addled mind. But the standard hello and goodbye were obvious enough for the connection to be made in my head. My aunt took great care in creating this, focusing like a preschooler with some sort of demonic macaroni craft. The whole time she muttered to herself, but I never caught a clear sentence out of it. Using a glass coaster as a planchette, she set to work summoning something. By this point I was silent save the sucking of air in through the new gap in my mouth. The room had gone completely still. Nothing happened for several moments. The atmosphere was suffocating as every nerve in my body stood on edge. Without warning, the coaster slid to its first destination, making a screech as the wood scraped over the glass. I couldn't keep track of what it was spelling out, and the nonsense symbols made it all the more difficult, but my aunt watched closely and nodded sagely every so often. I tried to figure out if it was just my imagination that made it look like the coaster was moving without prodding from her fingertips. The dying afternoon had lowered the temperature considerably even in the southern early autumn, and shock was beginning to make me tremble. Each shake shot bolts of pain from my fingers, teeth, and head, but I couldn't take my eyes off the scene before me. I remember thinking to myself, maybe they'll tell her to let me go. A loud crash from the kitchen made me jump, crunching bits of tooth between my molars in the process, and caused my aunt to pause. She raced into the other room, yelled out something with giddily, and returned to stalk towards me with feverish delight. That was their sign. This is it. He will be so happy. She grabbed my breast and twisted it sharply. You want this, don't you? This. She scrambled to pick up the knife once more and eyed the pale flesh on my bare thigh. I'd been wearing shorts. Humming random notes, she began to carve the same symbols into my thigh. At one point she carefully sliced up and peeled back a circle of my skin. This she placed on her nose and grinned at me. Boo. She giggled. You just loved that when you were little. I firmly believe that shock and blood loss as well as the concussion I no doubt had were the cause of what I began to see next. While she carved into my leg, I stared at the far corner of the room. I was convinced I saw a shadow gathering there. In reality it was probably just the setting sun chasing away light, but I was so certain that the darkness was taking shape. I've never experienced sleep paralysis, but the feeling I had was almost exactly the same. Something was watching us. Something evil. It wanted to revel in my torture. The sheer madness of the entire situation convinced me that this was the one my aunt had been babbling about. If there was in fact a creature that wanted my flesh, it was definitely descending upon us. I screamed my throat ragged. I continued to try to get her off, but the wiggling only dug her knife deeper into me. If you stay still, I'll be very careful, she sang. My eyes locked on the shadow and I began to plead. I begged her to let me go. I begged her to remember that I was her niece. I promised her I'd let her run free. I said I'd never tell Mom who had done this. I told her I'd let her have anything she wanted if she would just please stop this. In response, she put her finger to her lips and shushed me. Do you hear that? She froze and I held my breath. I strained my ears. Honestly, there could have been nothing but the blood rushing in my head, but my poor brain translated this into faint whispers. My aunt grinned at me. They come. They want you. And he will take it. Yes he will. Yes, he will take what he wants. She said this with a sort of reverence that chilled me. She used her legs to force mine apart and pointed the tip of the knife at my crotch. I'll slice your cunt wide enough for them to all crawl inside. I'll stuff them into you. All inside. She giggled, though her eyes suddenly became pained. She moved her face in close and clawed at one of the sores on her cheeks. I can feel them crawling out of me, she moaned. She held up one of her arms and shoved the abscess into my sight. Can you see them? Can you? You aren't even looking. In her rage she shoved the abscess into my face, smearing pus and dead flesh into my eyes. It was vile enough to wake me up and renew my struggling to break free. Why was it so cold? Why did I hear those whispers? My aunt was wailing and clawing at her arm, momentarily taken by the need to dig out whatever was killing her skin. I desperately railed against the bonds enough to make the chair jump. Ceasing this momentum, I rocked from side to side enough to tip over to my right. Unfortunately, my neck had been tied to something else behind me. I was stuck trying to position my legs to keep the chair from sliding further and strangling me. This broke my aunt out of her lapse in attention. With a snarl she kicked at my leg and the jerk left me gasping for air. My vision was beginning to blur. My gaze moved past my aunt and onto the shadow now. In the darkness it had begun to spread out of the corner like an ink drop. There were faces. I was sure of it. There were faces in the thing that was coming to claim me. I was mesmerized as my eyes tried to focus on the shifting form. I forced my burning, bleeding leg to keep my propped, but the darkness was becoming deeper and moved closer. It would take me. It would seep out my soul through all the cuts and bruises in my body. This sounds slightly profound now, but at the time all these thoughts were occurring instantly together as I gave way to pure panic. My heartbeat pounded a thundering cadence in my ears as they seeped towards me. I didn't even hear my aunt slip away before the scream hit my ears and the lights flooded the room. Again at this point my memory dulls. My mother rushed in and found me in that state. She raced me to the hospital with my grandparents while calling the police. While I was recovering overnight, the small force of local cops searched the fields and forests for my aunt. Bulletins were put out. A deputy even went door to door down the single road by the house and warned the neighbors to stay inside and lock their doors. What I found more disturbing was the fact that my aunt had been tied down to the bed and locked in that room. The officers said that the ties looked like they had been chewed and then ripped off, but the door wasn't forced open. My grandparents, even my mother, swore that it had been locked before they left. They had double-checked it. No one let her out. They did find my aunt. She had hung herself with twine in a barn not far from our land. Though the nails don't grow on my left index and middle finger and thumb, thousands of dollars were able to correct my smile and my legs healed surprisingly well. Not to be overly spooky or dramatic, but I can't lie to you. I do still have nightmares. In them I wake up tied down somewhere with my aunt whispering over me. The markings on my legs sting like they were fresh. She looks exactly like she did that day, down to my blood on her lips. The only thing is, she's just one of the faces in that monster.
Be biologist. Be doing biologist shit. Buddies are setting carn traps on trees while I'm at camp trying to get a fire going. Fire won't catch. Bill sits next to me. Feels cold, but since everything was cold never cared about it. This fucking lint won't make a spark, shitty fuck equipment, where's Sam with the lighter? Keep complaining for a while. Realize the person next to me isn't talking. Feel a slight chill creeping up my spine. Slowly look ahead. Can see Sam's and Bill's flashlights in the woods ahead. Who the fuck is sitting next to me? Turn around, all I see is something black. Nope. Wake up next day. Sam and Bill are standing on top of me, white as milk. I'm laying in the middle of the ground a little bit away from the camp. They said they heard screaming and when they came I was nowhere to be seen. Had spent the whole night looking for me, shouting, yelling, all they got in response was a deep grunt. Try to get up, pain everywhere. MFW, this is what I looked like when they tore my shirt off. MFW, I had torn both my pectoralis, as if trying to push/fight something away, to the point where the muscle tore, and broken 5 ribs and a clavicle. MFW, I'm never doing field trip work again. MFW, every night I nope at the slightest feel of something brushing against me. Where were you when this happened? Fort Campbell, Tennessee. Fort Campbell, Tennessee. This figure was captured on video in the same area by YouTube user James Jones. I named it Homed Man, but it could be just a bunch of trees. Now that you told your story, it made me think of it. Coincidence? Or do we have a real thing here? If it was a bear, you wouldn't be here to post that story, just saying. Dad is from Virginia. Visit his family every summer, drive the Blue Ridge Parkway, see bears, cool shit. Grandmother has little riverside cottage in West Virginia. She's so old she can barely tie her own shoes anymore, so we're in the process of buying it from her because she really has no need for it anymore. Anyways, the other summer my parents wanted to fix the place up some. We're staying there for a month. No internet, barely any phone service. Other cottages within 100 yards but only sometimes occupied, so pretty isolated usually. Bored as shit all the time, so start exploring. About a mile from the cottage I start walking up this hill. Get to the top and all the underbrush clears out. Hilltop mostly flat, about half the size of a football field. Absolutely fucking covered in moss, feels like walking on a pillow. Oddly definite division between moss at hilltop and regular ground, dirt, leaves, shrubbery, etc., like a damn near straight line. Only thing in moss field was one huge oak and a few large stumps. Walking around field, about to leave when I hear this weird hooting call from somewhere nearby. Another hoot from a different place, followed by two more coming from a third place. Begin to get a little spooked. There are a few more hoots, one or two from new places. Decide to leave, take my 4-inch buck knife out of my pocket and open it just in case. Head back down the hill to the cottage, hooting dies down. Rest of day is uneventful, go into town grocery shopping with my mom. Storm rolling in. That evening I'm in my sleeping bag on the screened-in porch, sleep out there because I like to hear the night sounds and feel the air and shit. Pretty much forgot about hooting/moss field. Storm is breaking, lightning, and thunder, wind, etc. Over the wind and rain I think I hear something. That hooting, except this time it's a sustained note. Builds in volume, realize that it's several of whatever is making it all calling together. Spooked. After several seconds the sound dissipates. Silent except rain for a moment. Hooting starts again, more join in, becomes this weird reverberating drone. I know what coyotes sound like, they live all around where I'm from and call often. These are not fucking coyotes. Sound eventually fades out again. Hear nothing but the storm for several minutes. Think whatever it is has chilled out for the night. Big flash of lightning, hooting/wailing starts again. Dies off. Another flash, starts, then fades. Realize the lightning is prompting the noises. Suddenly hear crackling in the woods outside. Something's moving through the brush. Can hear it getting closer, sound stops about 30 feet from the cottage. We keep a small yard area around the building clear of leaves and twigs and shit, so the ground is mostly moss which doesn't make much noise. My dad has kept a bucket of corn and stuff fermenting in the yard to use to bait the river for carp. Hear the lid being pried off the bucket, lid hits the ground. Sloshing noises, soft cooing, almost like a pigeon trying to fuck. More cooing from other place in the yard, lid on ground is jostled and makes a noise, cooing gets high-pitched and louder for a second. A lawn chair is knocked over, cooing again gets agitated. Contemplating grabbing a flashlight and going outside. Too much of a pussy, stay quiet and huddled in sleeping bag. Hear something sliding along the screen not 10 feet from where my head is. This is how I die. Porch door is bumped, thankfully is locked. More cooing, now right at the screen. Too scared to move. Scratching at screen, bucket lid is knocked again and hear high-pitched cooing from that direction. Cooing/scratching at screen moves away. All the noises seem to be going away. Praise Jesus. Lightning flashes. Suddenly the hooting starts, only this time it's not all far away. Couldn't have been more than 20 feet into the underbrush. After noise subsides, hear some more movement in the woods. Loud branch snapping, short screech. After that mostly quiet except for distant hooting with the lightning. After a few hours of laying quietly in my sleeping bag listening to them, the storm subsides and they stop calling, finally able to fall asleep. Next morning, chair is knocked over, bucket of carp bait spilled everywhere. Ornate bird feeder missing. Didn't hear anything messing with it, but it's just gone. Wanna go check out moss field but too scared. It occurred to me that the only way for moss to grow out here was for someone to constantly maintain an open space, keeping all the other forest refuse from building up on top of it. Not even a stray twig on top of that hill. Something's keeping it clear. Decided that whatever was up there I didn't wanna fuck with it. Never go back. Can still sometimes hear hooting during thunderstorms, but never seen/heard anything close to the cottage again. Go on living my life, avoiding disturbing weird-ass forest creatures. Get GF, get dick sucked, life is good, those little Appalachian fuckwads can have their moss field for all I care. Pics related, all of the river the cottage was on.
I've got a pretty good one my friend told me a while back. I originally posted this on /x/ a while back, so I already have it all typed up. It really got to me the first time I heard it, so I like sharing it. Anyway, just some backstory, my high school town was pretty small, my graduating class had around 200 people in it, I think. It is also kind of in the middle of nowhere. There is really only one main road going through the center, all the other roads are back roads going through the woods. I will be retelling the story from a first-person perspective because I think it will be easier and sound less awkward if I don't have to keep saying he did this and he did that. I'm going to do my best to tell it to you exactly the way he said it happened. Here we go. It was pretty fucked up, and I don't even know how else to describe it. Just thinking about what could have happened terrifies me. It was January, junior year, and I was dating Kayla, not real name. We wanted to fool around but we didn't have anywhere to do it, so we decided to find a random road where we could park my car. We had done it a couple of times before without any incidents. So at like 2 in the morning, we drove all the way down Adobe, you know the road by the gas station? We got to the end, and there was a horse trail branching off into the woods. I was pretty wide, so we decided to drive to the end of the horse trail. When we got to the end I turned the car around so that the woods were to our back and the road was in front. This way I could see if another car was coming down the trail. So if you know Kayla at all, she is pretty crazy. But all she wanted to do was fuck, so I was thinking with my dick. We had sex probably 4 times, it was awesome. We were taking a break from this, cuddling in my back seat when things started to get weird. There was a loud noise coming from the woods. It kind of sounded like screaming. I'm pretty sure it was an animal dying, it definitely wasn't human. So that kind of put me on edge, but I wasn't really that concerned. 10 minutes later, we hear more screaming. This time though it sounded more human to me. Like I was pretty confident that a person was screaming out there. And it went on for probably a minute. I'm freaking out now, but Kayla was getting horny again, so she was trying to convince me everything was fine. I was too distracted by the thought of more sex, so I decided to stick around. More accurately, my dick decided that I was going to stick around. The screaming had stopped though, so I slowly settled back in. About 20 minutes later though, we hear a very distinct voice yelling in the woods. Help. Help me. It was a male voice, and it sounded like it was maybe 50 meters away. Now I'm freaking out, and even Kayla was starting to get scared. She wanted to go and see if someone was hurt, but I told her fuck no, we are staying in the car. So we waited out, and 10 minutes later we hear it again. Help. Please help me. Really loud this time, and closer, probably 30 meters from the car now. We both went silent. All the windows were fogged up, so we couldn't even see outside. Finally, logic trumps my dick and I start to get ready to get the hell out of there. I start putting on my pants and looking for my keys. I had climbed into the front seat when a pickup truck came from somewhere off the path about 100 meters in front of us. The truck pulled over to the side and parked. A guy gets out and starts shining a red flashlight around the road and then into the woods. I'm frozen in fear, and Kayla is grabbing my arm and telling me not to leave until this guy does. He eventually starts wandering closer to the edge of the road near the woods. I start to breathe a little easier and continue to look for my keys. Kayla started to say she found the key, but before she could, right outside my car we hear more yelling. Help! Help me! Please! It's not even 5 meters away now. Kayla slams the keys into my hand and I peel out as fast as possible, probably fucking my car up. I'm doing probably 70 down this shitty path. We start approaching the truck and I see the guy with the red light turn around. I just floor it past him. I drive Kayla straight home, and I remember telling her, I don't care what the consequences are. With your parents, you are going home right now. We might have just seen something terrible. I go home, tell my mom my stomach hurt and went to sleep. The next morning I was going bowling with a friend, and I told him the story. He said he wanted to go back to where it happened to see if there were footprints because he didn't believe me. There was a lot of snow on the ground, but it hadn't snowed that night, so there should be clear footprints. We drove back out there, and sure enough, there were footprints. And these prints told a story. My friend wanted to be a cop, so he considered himself an expert on the evidence. I don't know if he actually does know what he's talking about, but a lot of what he was saying made sense logically. Anyway, we went back. First, we checked out where it appeared the truck had stopped. The night before I had thought the truck had come out of the woods and onto the path, but it was clear now that it had come down the road just like we had. You could see tire tracks in the snow where it had pulled over. You could also see the footprints where red light guy got out. We followed the prints into the woods. They went only 15 or 20 meters back. They led to a huge pile of deer bones. And when I say huge, they were at least 20 different deer skulls. The returning footprints just led back to the truck, so we decided to check out the area where Kayla and I were. This is where things got really interesting. Where did this happen? Minnesota. The first thing we noticed when we pulled up was the place where I had sped off. You could tell I was hauling ass. There were a lot of footprints around the car. It must have been a common place for people to park. So we went into the woods behind where I was parked, and towards the direction the screams for help had come from. We eventually found some footprints, and there were no other ones in the area. They looked fresh, and big. Size 12s, my friend guessed. So we followed them. They went in the direction of where my car had been parked. What was weird was the way they got closer. The footprints would zigzag in the general direction of my car. But once they got close enough to be in viewing distance of my car, the prints would stop every so often. You could tell the maker of the prints had stopped and stayed in these spots for a while. My friend pointed out that the prints at these spots were more defined and that the snow was melted more, indicating that he had waited at these spots. And at all of these spots, the prints were facing my car. The prints continued to get closer to my car, stopping every so often. They get about 10 meters from my car before they stop for the last time. This time though, you can tell that he wasn't standing. He was kneeling. There was a clear, defined print of someone's knee. After that, the footprints start to get really spread out. It looked like he started sprinting after my car when I sped off. That's it. Thoughts? Interpretations? I have a theory about what was going on, but I'd love to hear other thoughts. My theory is that the guy who was calling for help was trying to get my friend and his girlfriend out of the car so he could murder them or something. Which terrifies me because if I was in that situation, I may have gotten out of the car to try and help. I'm not sure about the guy driving the truck. He may have just been a deer poacher dumping deer bones.